Hi there, and welcome to 30-Minute Money. I'm Steve Wershing. Your mother probably told you to eat your fruits and vegetables. And so now that you're a grown person, how do you figure out what a nutritious diet is? Should you eat your fruits and vegetables? Sure. Only fruits and vegetables? And how much? Is a pound of kale the same as a pound of grapes? Your mom had a good idea, but obviously it's not quite enough. You need more information. And the same thing can be said of how you make the decision to participate in your company's retirement plan. So much of what you hear has a kernel of truth in it, but usually there's not quite enough information to go on. Like when you go to work for a company and you have the chance to sign up for a 401k. Should you do it? Probably. And how much should you put into it? Your mom might say, save a little of everything you make. Some advisors will tell you to save as much as possible. Neither of those is terribly helpful. So let's break it down into a few parts and we'll see if we can't help you make the decision that's right for you. First, how much do you need to save for retirement? Well, it depends on a lot of things, of course. When do you want to retire? What kind of lifestyle do you want? How much do you have saved already? How much do you make? If you're in your 30s or 40s, you can't even realistically answer several of those questions, like when are you going to retire and how much you're going to need. But as a rough place to start, let's go to the Center for Retirement Research in Boston. Depending on your age, they have found that to maintain the same lifestyle into retirement that you had before retirement, you probably need to be saving 12 to 14% of your income. Now that depends on a lot of things, but let's start there. So the next question, the one before us, is how much of that do you put in your 401k? Many advisors would say all of it, but like the eat your fruits and vegetables suggestions, there are a bunch of assumptions built into that. And from my perspective, I think that many of those assumptions are questionable and makes that advice questionable. I don't think it makes that much sense to put as much as possible or everything you're going to save into your 401k. So let's take it apart and see what goes into that. A 401k, like a traditional IRA, has the benefits of taking deposits pre-tax. And that's one of the reasons that so many advisors say, just load it up, like put as much as you possibly can in there. Your investments grow without being taxed until retirement. And then when you take it out in retirement, you pay tax on it at that point. So you put off years and years of taxation. And that has some benefits, but it doesn't necessarily make it the best option for you. There's also a Roth IRA, and increasingly now there are Roth 401ks. The difference between a 401k or an IRA and a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k is that in the Roth options, the money goes in after it's been taxed. It still grows without being taxed, but when you go to pull it out in retirement, it comes out tax-free. That means once you've paid the taxes on the deposits, it's the last time you will ever pay tax on that money or what it eventually becomes. Now, which is better? Well, if we do a simple analysis, like many financial analysts will do, it will look like this. And in terms of how big a balance it will build up, what the mathematicians will tell you is there's really no difference. If you put money into a pre-tax account, and you accumulate it over time, and then you pull it out in retirement and pay the tax at that point, you will end up with exactly the same amount as if you had taken the after-tax money, which is a smaller amount. It's the amount that you have left after you've paid the tax on it. You let that accumulate, and then you pull it out tax-free. Mathematically, in the long run, it's the same with a whole bunch of assumptions built into it. But also, it's not really the same. For one thing, if you put money into a Roth IRA today and you have to pay a little more tax, are you actually going to adjust the deposit based on how much tax you're going to have to pay? Probably not. If you're going to put $5,000 into an IRA, whether it be a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, you're going to put $5,000 in there, and then you're going to let the taxes shake out the way they are. This is one of those areas where economic theory and strict financial analysis bumps up against behavioral economics. To make it a fair comparison from a mathematical standpoint, we need to contribute the full amount to the pre-tax account and the after-tax amount to the Roth kind of an account. But in reality, that's not usually how it works, actually. Usually what it means is that if you put money into a Roth, 401k or IRA, and you end up having to pay a little bit more tax, that will come out of your bank account today, and you might go out to dinner a couple fewer times, or you might take a little less extravagant a vacation, but the full amount goes in. And so in that case, having money in the tax-free bucket is better because it will grow more, and you'll be able to get it out without paying tax in retirement. However, a lot of the advice out there suggests that you use your 401k because you'll probably have less income and therefore be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. But that's probably not true for a few reasons. Let's take a look at those. One assumption is that you'll need less income when you to maintain the same lifestyle when you go to retire. It's called a replacement ratio. When I started doing financial planning a long time ago, we were taught that you could assume that when someone retired, they would need 70% of their pre-retirement income to maintain the same lifestyle. But as time has progressed, what we're finding is that that's not true, or at least it's not true anymore. Here's a table from Vanguard that shows what people actually spend as a proportion of their pre-retirement income at different income levels based on how much they saved before retirement. You know, there's a range of statistics here, but the reality is you'll probably need closer to 85% of what you made before retiring. And I was talking with another advisor today who has observed and has seen some studies that say you'll really probably need more like 90% of what you were making just before retirement when you retire. So that replacement ratio is an important assumption, because it means that we can't necessarily assume that we will be in a lower tax bracket in retirement because we're earning less or that we can afford to earn less. Doesn't necessarily happen that way. Now, if we think about saving money on taxes today, we also may forget that our income will be going up over time. It rises along with the cost of living, inflation, sure, but it also rises because as we get more skilled and get more experienced, we merit a higher paycheck. As you progress through your career, your income doesn't just go up by the rate of inflation, it goes up more than that. In fact, according to a study by Payscale.com, it probably continues to go up and up and up into your late 50s. So if you're on the younger side of that, you'll probably retire at a much higher income level than you have today. And a higher income level may mean a higher tax bracket. But here's the biggest whammy that really blows up the argument about saving money on taxes today. It assumes that tax rates will be level. They will not be level. I can say that with confidence because it's written right into the tax law. Our current rates today are the result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and written right into the law is an expiration of those rates. They will be going back up to 2017 rates as long as Congress doesn't do anything on January 1st, 2026. Now, when it comes to raising tax rates, the safest bet of all is that Congress will not do anything, because the last thing a politician wants to do when they're coming up on an election is to have people remember that their tax rates just went up. So they're not scheduled to go up dramatically in this next step when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires in 2026. But let's take a look at the bigger picture. Here's a graph of the highest marginal income tax brackets in the US. This goes back to 1913, and you can see that we are in a period of relatively low taxes. Not the lowest, certainly, but these are just the top rates. You're probably not in the top rate, but rather than get too complicated, because trying to show all the tax brackets would be crazy, this is a convenient way of looking at it. And if we're only talking about returning to the historic average, then rates will go up. But there are even more reasons beyond just the averages why they will probably go up. Here is a graph that shows how much debt the US government has. As a proportion of the total economy, it's the highest it's ever been. Just over the last couple of years, as we've battled this pandemic, the government has pumped trillions of dollars into the economy, and we have to figure out some way to pay that back. It's hard to imagine how they'll pull it off without raising taxes. maybe by a lot. So if you want to take advantage of today's tax rates, you'll put money in a tax-free account like a Roth and happily pay the additional taxes. Okay, so maybe you won't happily pay it, but you'll pay it maybe a little less grudgingly at today's rate, knowing that today's rate is likely to be lower than tax rates in the future, and that your bracket right now is probably going to be a lower bracket than you will pay later in your career. Now, there's one other consideration that has a big impact on the decision of how much to put in your 401k, and that's whether your employer matches your contributions. Most company retirement plans get deposits from the employer as well as the employee. And in about 71% of those plans, that employer contribution is structured as a match, meaning that the company puts money in to the extent that you put money in. And the most common strategy is that the company will match 50 cents of every dollar that you put in up to a certain limit, and the most common limit is 6%. That means if you put in, say, 2% and they match 50 cents on the dollar, they'll put in 1%. If you put in 4, they'll put in 2. If you put in 6, they'll put in 3. And if that's how much they'll match, you can put in 7, 8, even 15%. They'll still just match. They'll put in the 3% match that went up to 6. So whatever you need to do to get the most from your employer's match, your employer contribution, is worth doing. If not, you're just leaving money on the table. It would be like your employer offering you a raise and you taking a pass on it. No thanks, but I'm getting paid plenty. So put in enough to maximize the match. Even if you have to figure out a way to rearrange your household budget, it's probably worth it, and it's certainly worth looking into. By the way, some people who really want to maximize their retirement saving strategy will say, well, let me put in as much as possible early in the year, and then when I hit the maximum, I'll just stop. So I'll put in 25% if I can at the beginning of the year, and then, whenever I have to pull back on that, end of the first quarter, end of the second quarter, I'll do that. But that will not get you the maximized match, because while you might be putting in 6% over the course of the whole year, most plans only match it one payment at a time, which means if you put in more than 6% this pay period, they will only put in their match, assuming that 6% is your match. If you put in 25% now, they'll still only match up to 6%. And when you stop, because you've hit the max that you want to put in for the year, they'll stop matching, which means you won't get the full match because they will only match payment by payment. So partly because it's easier and partly because this will maximize the match, figure out how much the company will match, how much you have to put in to maximize the company match, and then do that consistently over the course of the full year. That will make sure that you get as much from your employer as possible. Now, I mentioned Roth 401ks before. So if you have the opportunity to participate in a 401k, then as much as you can, and if you want to take the Center for Retirement Research's advice, you can put in that 12%, 14% now, and you can do the whole thing into the Roth 401k, especially if the company will match into the Roth one as well. But if you have a regular 401k, here is the strategy. You thought you were asking a simple question: how much should I put in my 401k? And I'm giving you, unfortunately, a lot more complicated answer, but here's as simple as I think I can make it. Contribute as much to your company plan as it takes to maximize what the company will put in. And if it's a traditional 401k, stop at that point and start contributing to a Roth IRA. If you contribute the maximum to the Roth IRA, then you can switch back to the 401k. Or if you earn enough and you're committed to consistently doing it for long enough, there are other tax-free retirement savings options that are out there. They're a little bit beyond the scope of this particular podcast, but talk with your advisor or call us. We can tell you about what some of those options are. But the simplest way to look at it is put money into your 401k until you've maximized the match, then switch over to contributing to a Roth IRA. And if you contribute up to the top of the Roth IRA and you still want to put money away, you can go back to the 401k and start contributing again. Now, you might not have thought that how much you put in your 401k involves doing tax planning decades into the future potentially, but if you really want to make the most out of your finances long term, you need to start thinking about some of those things as far ahead as you possibly can. Retiring as close to the lifestyle that you want does take some planning as early as possible. We may not be able to calculate it exactly. We may not be able to tell you, here's the proportion of your paycheck that you need to be putting away. But in terms of setting things up so that you accumulate as much as you need and you can get it out in a tax efficient manner, that you can do you can do for your whole life. So if you follow this strategy, contribute up to the match, switch over to a Roth IRA, and then you can switch back if you max out the Roth IRA. That's going to put you in the best stead for maximizing the benefits from work and setting yourself up for the best possible tax situation way down the road. You're welcome to give us a call and talk with us if you'd like, if you have any questions about this strategy or would like to talk further about it. But that right there is how much to put into your 401k. I'm Steve Wershing. I'll look forward to talking with you next time on 30 Minute Money.